There's a place in the deserts of southern New Mexico where the wind never quite sounds like wind. It carries with it a kind of low moan, a trembling hum that seems to rise from the cracked red earth itself, as though the ground remembers something it was never meant to hold. On summer nights in that stretch of high desert, the stars burn with a ferocity that city dwellers have long forgotten, each pinpoint of light so vivid that it feels less like looking up and more like falling forward into an abyss that has no floor. It was under stars like these, in the first week of July 1947, that something fell from the sky over the ranching community near Roswell, New Mexico, and the trajectory of human civilization silently, invisibly, irreversibly changed. We have been told many things about what happened in that desert. We were told it was a weather balloon. We were told it was a classified military project. We were told, decades later, that it was a high-altitude surveillance apparatus designed to monitor Soviet nuclear tests. Each explanation arrived with the weary confidence of officialdom, each one designed to close a door that refused to stay shut. But there is another story, one that has surfaced in fragments across nearly 8 decades, in deathbed confessions and leaked memoranda, in classified annexes to reports that were never meant to see daylight. It is a story not merely about a crashed vehicle of unknown origin, but about what was found inside it. Not bodies, not propulsion technology. Something far older, far stranger, and far more dangerous to every assumption we hold about who we are and where we came from. They found the map, and the map knew things about this planet that no one on Earth, in 1947 or in any century before it, could possibly have known. To understand the gravity of what was recovered in that desert, you must first understand the desert itself and the era that cradled it. In 1947, the United States was barely 2 years removed from the most devastating war in human history. The atomic age had been born in the very same state where the wreckage would fall, at the Trinity test site in the Jornada del Muerto desert, a name that translates, with grim poetry, to the journey of the dead man. The men who patrolled those skies and guarded those installations were not prone to flights of fancy. They were hardened veterans of a global conflict that had incinerated cities and split the atom. The 509th Bomb Group, stationed at Roswell Army Airfield, was the only nuclear-armed squadron on the planet, the same unit that had dropped the bombs on Hiroshima and Nagasaki. These were men entrusted with the most terrible weapons ever devised. They did not panic easily, and they did not mistake tinfoil and balsa wood for something extraordinary. And yet, when the first reports filtered in from Mac Brazel's ranch and the debris field was surveyed by military intelligence officer Major Jesse Marcel, something happened that would define the next 8 decades of secrecy. Within hours, a press release was issued by the Roswell base itself, stating that the Army had recovered a flying disc. Within hours more, that statement was retracted and replaced with the weather balloon story, a correction that came not from Roswell but from the 8th Air Force headquarters in Fort Worth, Texas, where Brigadier General Roger Ramey posed for photographs with substituted debris that looked nothing like what the men on the ground had described. The door was being closed, bolted, and welded shut before the world even understood what it had glimpsed. But the debris field on the Brazel Ranch was only the public face of the event, the scattered wreckage that drew the initial attention and provided the fodder for decades of debate about memory metal and strange hieroglyphic markings on structural beams. What fewer people know, what only began to surface in the 1980s and 90s through the testimonies of aging military personnel and their families, was that there was a second site, approximately 2 to 3 miles from the main debris field, in a shallow arroyo where the desert floor dips into a natural depression shielded from the surrounding terrain. A more intact section of the craft was recovered. This was not a field of scattered fragments. This was a structured object, partially buried in the earth from the force of impact. Its exterior surface described by multiple witnesses as seamless, as though it had been grown rather than constructed, with a color that shifted between dull pewter and a deep, oil-slick violet depending on the angle of light. The air around it, according to one account preserved in a 1991 affidavit, smelled faintly of ozone and something else, something organic and sweet, like crushed sage mixed with copper. Military personnel established a perimeter within hours. Flatbed trucks were brought in under tarps. The recovery operation was conducted not by regular Army but by a specialized team that arrived from Washington with no unit markings and orders that superseded every local chain of command. Whatever was in that arroyo, the United States government wanted it, and they wanted it before anyone else could so much as glimpse its outline against the New Mexico sky. Among the materials recovered from this second site, cataloged under a classification level that reportedly exceeded top secret and fell into a compartmented access program known only by a code name that has itself been redacted from every surviving document, was an object that defied immediate categorization. It was not a piece of the craft's hull. It was not an instrument panel or a propulsion component, at least not in any sense that the engineers and scientists who first examined it could comprehend. It was flat, approximately 2 feet by 3 feet, with a thickness of no more than a quarter inch, and it was composed of a material that resembled a dark, translucent crystal but behaved like no crystal known to terrestrial mineralogy. When illuminated, either by direct sunlight or by artificial light of sufficient intensity, the interior of this slab came alive. Points of light appeared within it, not on its surface, but seemingly suspended at varying depths inside the material, as though the crystal contained a three-dimensional space far larger than its physical dimensions should have allowed. These points of light were not random. They formed patterns, clusters, connecting lines, a network of relationships that one early analyst, a Navy astronomer brought in under conditions of absolute secrecy, reportedly described in a hastily written memo as resembling nothing so much as a star chart of extraordinary precision, but one that seemed to be oriented not from the perspective of any point in interstellar space, but from the surface of the Earth itself. The stars in this map, if that is what it was, were not the subject. They were the frame. What the map was actually depicting, what its glowing lines and nodes were tracing with uncanny geometric exactitude, were locations on this planet. Our planet! Locations that, in 1947, no single human being had ever correlated or connected, because they were separated by oceans, by millennia, and by civilizations that supposedly had no knowledge of one another's existence. It is here that our story fractures the comfortable boundary between ufology and archaeology, between the strange lights in the sky that most people can comfortably dismiss and the stone monuments on the ground that no one can deny, because the coordinates embedded in that crystalline map, when painstakingly decoded over the years that followed by a small, rotating cadre of analysts working under conditions of extraordinary compartmentalization, corresponded to sites that even a casual student of ancient history would recognize. The Great Pyramid of Giza, aligned to true north with a precision that modern construction struggles to replicate, built with 2.3 million blocks of limestone and granite, some weighing 80 tons, transported from quarries hundreds of miles away and fitted together with joints thinner than a sheet of paper. Angkor Wat in Cambodia, a temple complex spanning over 400 acres, its layout mirroring the constellation Draco as it appeared in the sky approximately 10,000 years before the temple's accepted construction date. Teotihuacan in central Mexico, the so-called City of the Gods, whose 3 main pyramids are arranged in precise correspondence with the belt stars of Orion and whose very name in the Nahuatl language means the place where men become gods. Göbekli Tepe in southeastern Turkey, the site that shattered the established timeline of civilization when its excavation revealed intricately carved stone pillars arranged in concentric circles dated to nearly 12,000 years before the present, 7,000 years older than Stonehenge and the accepted dawn of agriculture. Tiwanaku and Pumapunku in Bolivia, perched at nearly 13,000 feet in the Andes, where blocks of diorite and andesite weighing over 100 tons were cut with a precision that suggests technologies we still cannot identify, and where the local Aymara people have always maintained that the city was built not by their ancestors but by the gods, in a single night, after a great flood. Easter Island, alone in the vastness of the South Pacific, where nearly 900 monolithic statues gaze inland with expressions that seem less like worship and more like warning. Every one of these sites appeared as a node on the recovered map, every one connected by lines that formed a geometric pattern of breathtaking, terrible elegance. The pattern itself is what elevates this from a curiosity to a crisis of understanding. When the nodal points corresponding to these ancient sites are plotted on a globe and connected by the lines indicated on the crystalline artifact, they do not form a random scatter of historically significant locations. They form a geodesic network, a three-dimensional geometric structure mapped onto the surface of a sphere, with properties that echo the mathematics of Platonic solids, specifically the icosahedron and the dodecahedron, shapes that Plato himself described as the fundamental forms underlying the structure of the cosmos. The distances between these sites, when calculated along great circle routes, the shortest paths across the curved surface of the Earth, reveal ratios that recur with impossible consistency. The distance from Giza to Angkor Wat divided by the distance from Angkor Wat to Easter Island yields a number hauntingly close to the golden ratio 1.618, the mathematical constant that governs the spiral of a nautilus shell, the branching of a tree, the proportions of the human face, and the orbital relationships between planets. The distance from Teotihuacan to Giza divided by the circumference of the Earth produces a fraction whose numerator and denominator are both prime numbers. These are not approximations. These are not the kind of loose correlations that emerge when you search hard enough for patterns in random data. These are precise mathematical relationships encoded in stone, in structures built by civilizations separated by thousands of miles and thousands of years, civilizations that we insist had no contact with one another, no shared knowledge, no common architect. And yet someone, or something, placed every one of these structures exactly where it needed to be, as nodes in a planetary network whose purpose we are only now beginning to dimly suspect. The analysts who worked on decoding the artifact's coordinate system over the decades that followed its recovery operated under conditions that would be difficult to overstate. According to fragments of testimony that emerged through the work of researchers in the late 20th century, the project was housed not within any single military or intelligence agency, but within an oversight structure that existed in the interstitial spaces between agencies, funded through mechanisms that bypassed congressional appropriation and answerable to a control group so small that even sitting presidents were not automatically briefed on its existence. The scientists brought in to study the artifact were typically told only what they needed to know for their specific task. A crystallographer might be given a sample of the material and asked to analyze its molecular structure without being told where it came from. A mathematician might be given a set of coordinates and asked to identify geometric relationships without being told they were derived from a non-terrestrial artifact. An astronomer might be asked to date a star field without knowing it was contained inside a crystal slab recovered from a crash site in New Mexico. This compartmentalization was not merely a security measure. It was, according to one former analyst who spoke on condition of absolute anonymity before his death in 2009, a philosophical firewall. The implications of the artifact were so profound, so destabilizing to every framework of human history and human identity, that no single person was allowed to hold the full picture. The fear was not that someone would leak the information. The fear was that understanding the totality of what the artifact implied would be psychologically unsustainable, that the weight of it would break a mind the way a frequency can shatter glass, not through force, but through resonance with something too fundamental to withstand. Consider what these ancient sites represent individually before we confront what they represent as a collective. The Great Pyramid of Giza is not merely a large structure. It is a monument to precision that borders on the obsessive. Its base is level to within less than 1 inch across a footprint of 13 acres. Its orientation to true north deviates by less than 3/60ths of a single degree, an accuracy that exceeds that of the Royal Greenwich Observatory. The ratio of its perimeter to its height yields a value of 2 pi to multiple decimal places, encoding the mathematical relationship between a circle's circumference and its radius in stone thousands of years before the Greeks formalized the concept. The speed of light in meters per second, 299,792,458, corresponds to the latitude of the pyramid's apex to 6 significant figures. This was supposedly built by a Bronze Age civilization using copper tools and wooden sledges. Angkor Wat, meanwhile, contains bas-reliefs depicting creatures that bear a striking resemblance to stegosaurs, dinosaurs that went extinct 66 million years before any human being drew breath, and its astronomical alignments encode precession cycles spanning 26,000 years with an accuracy that implies continuous observation over millennia or access to knowledge that did not originate in observation at all. At Pumapunku, the stone blocks are cut with internal angles so precise and surfaces so flat that they appear to have been machined, and they interlock with a system of interlocking joints and channels that suggests they were designed to be assembled and disassembled like components of a modular system whose full configuration we have never seen. Each of these sites, examined in isolation, presents anomalies that strain the accepted narrative of human history. Examined together as nodes in a deliberate geometric network, they do not merely strain that narrative, they demolish it. Now we must turn to the most disturbing element of the crystalline map, the element that transforms this from a historical puzzle into an active and ongoing crisis of national and perhaps global security. Because the network of sites depicted on the artifact did not merely connect known locations, it indicated the existence of a node that, in 1947, corresponded to no known ancient site and no known human settlement of any kind. This node sat at a set of coordinates that placed it deep within the interior of the Antarctic continent, approximately 300 miles from the geographic South Pole, beneath an estimated 2 miles of ice. Antarctica, in the popular imagination, is a barren wasteland, a frozen desert devoid of human history. But this is a remarkably recent assumption. The Piri Reis map of 1513, drawn by the Ottoman admiral and cartographer Piri Reis, depicts the coastline of Antarctica with an accuracy that was not achieved by modern surveying until the mid-20th century. The map shows the continent as it would appear without its ice sheet, with coastal features, bays, and river deltas that have been confirmed by seismic surveys conducted centuries after the map was drawn. Piri Reis himself noted that he compiled his map from older source maps, some dating back to the time of Alexander the Great, and others of unknown provenance. The Orondius Phineus map of 1531 goes further, depicting Antarctica with interior mountain ranges and river systems that correspond to subglacial topography confirmed only by modern radar imaging from aircraft and satellites. Someone, at some point in the deep past, had detailed knowledge of Antarctica's geography as it existed before the ice sheet formed, a process that began approximately 34 million years ago but which, according to more recent geological evidence, may have left portions of the continent ice-free as recently as 12,000 years ago, coinciding precisely with the end of the last ice age and the date range suggested by the oldest sites in the artifacts network. The connection between Antarctica and the United States military did not begin with the Roswell recovery, but it took on a new urgency in its aftermath. In December of 1946, just 7 months before the Roswell incident, the United States Navy launched Operation High Jump, the largest Antarctic expedition ever mounted. Officially designated Task Force 68, it comprised 13 ships, including an aircraft carrier, 23 aircraft, and over 4,700 personnel under the command of Rear Admiral Richard Byrd, a man who had already achieved fame as a polar explorer and whose private journals and public statements would, in the years that followed, take on an increasingly cryptic and unsettling tone. The stated purpose of High Jump was to establish a research base and train personnel for polar operations, a plausible enough objective in the early Cold War era. But the scale of the operation was wildly disproportionate to this stated goal. This was a military task force, equipped for combat, deployed to a continent where the only enemy was supposed to be the weather. And the operation ended abruptly and ahead of schedule in February of 1947, with Byrd returning to Washington to deliver classified briefings whose contents have never been fully disclosed. In a widely reported but rarely analyzed interview with the Chilean newspaper El Mercurio upon his return, Byrd made a statement that sent shockwaves through intelligence circles. He said that in the event of a new war, the United States would have to face the possibility of attack by aircraft that could fly from pole to pole at incredible speeds. This was not the language of a man who had spent 2 months mapping penguin colonies. This was the language of a man who had encountered something that terrified him. After the Roswell recovery and the initial analysis of the crystalline artifact, the interest in Antarctica did not diminish. It intensified, but it went underground, buried beneath layers of classification and misdirection that make the Manhattan Project look like a public relations campaign. Throughout the 1950s and 60s, a series of expeditions were conducted under the auspices of the International Geophysical Year and its successor programs, cooperative scientific ventures that provided perfect cover for operations that were anything but cooperative and anything but purely scientific. The United States, the Soviet Union, and to a lesser extent the United Kingdom, France, and Norway all maintain permanent or semi-permanent research stations on the Antarctic continent, and all of them conducted activities that went far beyond the meteorological and geological research described in their published findings. Seismic surveys were conducted at depths and locations that had no relevance to any stated scientific objective. Ground-penetrating radar, a technology that was still in its military infancy, was deployed across vast swaths of the East Antarctic ice sheet, focusing on regions that, according to the known topography, should have held nothing of interest. And in 1959, the Antarctic Treaty was signed, an agreement among 12 nations that designated the entire continent as a demilitarized zone dedicated to peaceful scientific research. This treaty, which has been renewed and expanded multiple times and which now includes over 50 signatory nations, is frequently cited as one of the great achievements of international cooperation during the Cold War. And perhaps it is, but it is also, by its very structure, a mechanism for controlling access to the continent, for determining who goes where and what they are allowed to look for. The most restricted zones under the treaty's protocols correspond, with an uncomfortable precision, to the approximate coordinates indicated by the Antarctic node on the Roswell artifact. What lies beneath the Antarctic ice at those coordinates remains, officially, unknown, but the evidence that something lies there, something artificial, something ancient, something that powerful nations have gone to extraordinary lengths to simultaneously investigate and conceal, is not confined to the testimony of anonymous insiders and the implications of a recovered alien artifact. Modern satellite data has revealed anomalies beneath the East Antarctic ice sheet that defy easy geological explanation. In 2006, a team using NASA GRACE satellites, which measure variations in Earth's gravitational field, identified a massive gravitational anomaly centered on Wilkes Land, a region approximately 300 miles in diameter where the gravitational signature suggests the presence of an extraordinarily dense object or structure buried beneath the ice at a depth of approximately half a mile. The conventional explanation offered was that this anomaly represents an ancient asteroid impact crater, and indeed the size is roughly consistent with such an interpretation, but the gravitational signature does not perfectly match the expected profile of an impact crater. It is too symmetrical, too concentrated, and it contains secondary anomalies, smaller gravitational peaks within the larger structure that suggest internal differentiation, internal architecture, as though whatever is down there is not a natural formation but a constructed one. In 2016, further analysis of the Wilkes Land anomaly using data from the European Space Agency's GOES satellite revealed that the dense mass is not uniformly distributed but appears to be arranged in a pattern that one researcher, speaking off the record at a geophysics conference, described as disturbingly regular. No peer-reviewed paper has elaborated on this observation. No follow-up study has been published. The silence itself is a kind of testimony. There is another thread to this story that must be woven in, a thread that connects the crystalline map not merely to the stones of ancient temples but to the myths and sacred texts of the civilizations that built them. Across every continent, in every culture that has left a record of its beliefs, there exists a tradition of beings who came from the sky, who brought knowledge and technology, who taught the arts of civilization, and who either departed with the promise to return or retreated to a hidden place within the earth itself. The Sumerian texts describe the Anunnaki, those who from heaven came, who established their first settlements in the region between the Tigris and Euphrates, and who, according to the tablets, had a particular interest in a land they called the Abzu, a term variously translated as the deep, the abyss, or the far south, which some scholars have noted could refer not to the Persian Gulf, as is conventionally assumed, but to the Antarctic. The ancient Egyptian tradition speaks of the Zet Tepi, the first time, an age before recorded history when the gods walked the earth and established the foundations of civilization, and the Edfu texts preserved in the Temple of Horus describe a primeval homeland of the gods that was destroyed by a flood and from which the survivors traveled north to establish new sacred sites according to a divine plan. The Hindu Puranas describe a geography of the cosmos that includes a southern continent of extraordinary power, guarded by forces that prevent human access, and they describe an age, the Satya Yuga, when gods and men lived in proximity and the knowledge of the cosmos was openly shared. The Norse Eddas speak of a world tree, Yggdrasil, whose roots extend to the farthest reaches of the earth, and of a hidden realm at its base. The Hopi of the American Southwest describe a succession of worlds, each destroyed and rebuilt, and speak of an emergence from underground and of beings called the Kachinas who came from the stars to guide humanity through its transitions. These are not casual parallels. These are structural correspondences, a shared mythological architecture that, like the physical architecture of the temples themselves, suggests a common source, a single body of knowledge dispersed across the planet in deep antiquity and encoded in both stone and story as a hedge against the forgetting that would inevitably come. The question that emerges from this convergence of evidence, from the crash in the desert and the crystal in the wreckage and the temples on the ground and the anomaly beneath the ice, is not a question that can be answered with physical evidence alone. It is a question about the nature of human civilization itself, about whether the story we tell ourselves, the story of a slow, linear ascent from savagery to sophistication, from caves to cathedrals, from grunts to grammar, is not merely incomplete but fundamentally, deliberately wrong. The conventional timeline of civilization places its origins approximately 5,000 years ago in Mesopotamia with the rise of the Sumerian city-states. Before that, according to the Standard Model, humans lived in small bands of hunter-gatherers, possessing no architecture, no mathematics, no astronomy, no written language. And yet Göbekli Tepe, excavated beginning in 1995 by the German archaeologist Klaus Schmidt, presents us with a complex of monumental stone structures dated to 11,600 years before the present, built by people who, according to every other piece of evidence, should have been incapable of such a feat. The pillars at Göbekli Tepe are carved with sophisticated reliefs of animals and abstract symbols. They are arranged in precise geometric patterns. They are aligned to specific stars and constellations, and they were deliberately buried, intentionally entombed under thousands of tons of fill, as though the builders wanted to preserve them, to hide them, to protect them until some future time when they would be uncovered and understood. Schmidt himself, before his death in 2014, remarked that Göbekli Tepe was not the beginning of civilization but a signpost pointing to something far older, something we have not yet found. Perhaps we have not found it because it is buried under 2 miles of Antarctic ice, at coordinates that were marked on a map no human hand ever drew. The secrecy surrounding the Antarctic node has not relaxed with the passage of decades. It has, if anything, intensified. In 2016, Secretary of State John Kerry made an unprecedented visit to Antarctica, arriving at McMurdo Station on November 11th, Election Day in the United States, a timing that guaranteed minimal media attention. The official explanation was that Kerry was there to observe the effects of climate change, a plausible enough rationale. But Kerry is not a climate scientist, and the logistics of transporting a sitting Secretary of State to the most remote continent on Earth are staggeringly complex, involving military aircraft, specialized cold weather equipment, and a security detail that itself requires its own support infrastructure. This was not a casual visit. This was a mission. That same year, Buzz Aldrin, the second man to walk on the moon, traveled to Antarctica and was medically evacuated after reportedly suffering a cardiac event. After his return to the United States, Aldrin posted and then deleted a statement on social media that read, in part, "We are all in danger, it is evil itself." He later attributed the statement to a hacked account, but those who knew Aldrin noted that his demeanor in the months following his Antarctic visit was markedly different, more guarded, more somber, as though he had seen something that weighed on him in a way that even walking on the surface of the moon had not. In 2017, the Russian Patriarch Kirill visited Antarctica, making him the first head of the Russian Orthodox Church to set foot on the continent. He conducted a religious ceremony at a small chapel near the Russian Belenshasen station, and upon his return he gave a sermon in which he spoke, in unusually direct terms, about the existence of evil in the physical world and the importance of spiritual preparedness for revelations that would challenge the foundations of faith. 3 of the most powerful figures in Western civilization, a diplomat, an astronaut, and a religious leader, all visited Antarctica within the same 12-month period. None of them offered a satisfactory public explanation for why. The geometry of the temple network, as indicated by the recovered artifact, is not merely a curiosity of historical geography. It appears to be functional. This is the aspect of the discovery that has reportedly generated the most intense interest and the most stringent secrecy within the classified programs tasked with studying the artifact. The geodesic pattern formed by the ancient sites corresponds to what some researchers have called the Earth's energy grid, a hypothesized network of electromagnetic pathways that girdle the planet, intersecting at points of unusual geological and geomagnetic activity. This concept has a long history in alternative science, dating back at least to the work of Ivan Sanderson in the 1960s, who identified 12 symmetrically distributed regions of unusual electromagnetic disturbance around the globe. Regions that are also associated with a disproportionate number of disappearances of ships and aircraft, anomalous compass readings, and reported time distortions. Sanderson's 12 vile vortices, as he called them, correspond almost exactly to the vertices of a regular icosahedron inscribed within the Earth, one of the same platonic solids reflected in the artifact's geometric pattern. Later researchers, including the Russian team of Goncharov, Morozov, and Nekarov, expanded this model to a combined icosahedron-dodecahedron grid of 62 points, and when this grid is overlaid on a map of the planet's ancient sacred sites, the correspondence is overwhelming. The temples are not randomly distributed reminders of past piety. They are, or appear to be, components of a planetary scale system, a technology that operates not through circuits and semiconductors, but through stone and geometry and the manipulation of energies that our current physics barely acknowledges, let alone understands. If the ancient sites are indeed nodes in a functional energy grid, then the Antarctic node takes on a significance that transcends archaeology and enters the realm of what can only be called planetary engineering. Consider the geometry. A network of points distributed across the surface of a sphere connected by lines of force, converging on a central node buried at one of the planet's poles, the point where the axis of rotation meets the surface, where the electromagnetic field lines converge, where the energy density of the planetary system reaches its maximum. This is not the architecture of a memorial or a place of worship. This is the architecture of a machine built into the fabric of the planet itself, using the planet's own geological and electromagnetic properties as its operating medium, and activated or regulated by structures placed at precise locations on its surface. What such a machine might do is a question that the classified programs have reportedly been wrestling with for decades. Some analysts have speculated that the network serves a stabilizing function, regulating the planet's electromagnetic field, its axial tilt, or even its orbital parameters, acting as a kind of gyroscopic flywheel that keeps the Earth's dynamic systems within habitable parameters. Others have proposed that the network is a communication system, a means of transmitting information across interstellar distances using the Earth itself as an antenna, its temples as tuning elements, and its molten iron core as a signal generator. And still others, the ones whose reports are marked with the highest classification levels and the fewest distribution lists, have speculated that the network is neither a stabilizer nor a transmitter but a gate, a mechanism for folding space-time itself, for connecting this planet to others across distances that conventional physics insists cannot be traversed, and that the Antarctic node is, or was, or could again be, the keystone of that gate, the point where the connection is made, where the door is opened, where something or someone could pass through. The implications of this possibility have shaped policy at the highest levels for nearly 8 decades. Consider the architecture of secrecy that has been built around this subject. Not merely the classification of the artifact itself, but the systematic discrediting of anyone who approaches any element of the larger picture. The ridicule heaped on UFO witnesses. The marginalization of archaeologists who question the established timeline of civilization. The professional destruction visited upon scientists who investigate anomalous phenomena. The deliberate conflation of serious inquiry with tinfoil hat paranoia. This is not the behavior of a government that has nothing to hide. This is the behavior of a government that is hiding something so vast, so paradigm-shattering, that it has constructed an entire cultural architecture of denial to keep it contained. The 1953 Robertson Panel, convened by the CIA, explicitly recommended a policy of debunking UFO reports and using mass media to strip the subject of its aura of mystery, not because UFOs were not real, but because public interest in them might overwhelm the intelligence agency's ability to manage the narrative. The Kennan Committee of 1966 through 1968, ostensibly a scientific investigation into UFO reports conducted by the University of Colorado, was described in an internal memo by the project coordinator Robert Lowe as a project whose trick would be to describe its methodology in such a way that, to the public, the study would appear objective, while the scientific community would understand that the conclusion that UFOs did not merit further study had been determined in advance. This is not science. This is information warfare, conducted not against a foreign enemy, but against the curiosity of the human species itself. And yet the truth has a way of seeping through even the most carefully constructed barriers. In 2017, the New York Times revealed the existence of the Advanced Aerospace Threat Identification Program, a Pentagon project funded with $22 million to study encounters between military personnel and unidentified aerial phenomena. In 2020, the Pentagon officially released 3 videos captured by Navy fighter pilots showing objects performing maneuvers that defied the known limits of aerodynamics, objects that had no visible means of propulsion, that moved at hypersonic speeds, that changed direction instantaneously without any observable deceleration, and that operated equally in air, water, and space. In 2021, the Office of the Director of National Intelligence released a preliminary assessment on unidentified aerial phenomena that admitted, for the first time in an official, unclassified government document, that these objects were real, that they were not American technology, and that their nature and origin were unknown. In 2023, David Grush, a former intelligence officer with the National Reconnaissance Office and the National Geospatial Intelligence Agency, testified before Congress that the United States government was in possession of non-human craft and non-human biological material, and that a decades-long program to reverse engineer these technologies had been concealed from congressional oversight. Each of these disclosures is extraordinary in its own right. Together, they form a pattern of controlled revelation, a slow, deliberate loosening of the bonds that have held this secret in place since 1947, as though the architects of the cover-up have concluded that the secret can no longer be maintained in full and are now managing its release, controlling the rate at which the dam breaks, hoping to avoid the flood that they have feared for nearly 80 years. But what if the flood is not what they fear most? What if the fear is not that the public will learn that we are not alone, that our history is not what we have been told, that our planet is embedded in a cosmic network of intelligence and intention that dwarfs our comprehension? What if the fear is more specific, more immediate, more operational? What if the Antarctic node is not dormant? What if it is active or activating? And the frantic visits of diplomats and astronauts and patriarchs in 2016 were not about discovery, but about response? What if the seismic data from the region, which has shown unusual patterns of deep subsurface activity in recent years, is not geological in origin? What if the magnetic field anomalies recorded by satellites over East Antarctica, anomalies that have been increasing in intensity since the early 2000s, are not natural fluctuations but indications that something beneath the ice is waking up, drawing power from the network, cycling through whatever process it was designed to execute? The ancient myths speak of cycles, of ages that end and begin again, of sleeping gods who will one day return, of buried cities that will one day rise. These myths are found on every continent. They are told by every culture, and they all converge on the same essential message. What was hidden will be revealed. What was sealed will be opened. What was sleeping will wake. The question is not whether this will happen. The question, if the artifact recovered in the New Mexico desert in 1947 is what it appears to be, is whether it has already begun. We return, as all stories must, to the desert where this one began. The ranch outside Roswell is quiet now, unremarkable, a stretch of brown grass and juniper scrub where cattle graze and the wind carries the faint scent of creosote and dust. There is nothing there to mark what fell from the sky on that July night. No monument, no plaque, no sign that this patch of earth is any different from the millions of acres of empty land that surround it. And perhaps that is the most fitting monument of all, the absence itself, the silence that speaks louder than any memorial ever could. Because the true legacy of what happened at Roswell is not a saucer or a star map or a set of coordinates pointing to something buried beneath the ice of a frozen continent. The true legacy is a question that has burned in the minds of everyone who has ever looked up at the night sky and felt, not with their intellect, but with something deeper, something older, something encoded in the very structure of their being, that the stars are not merely points of light in an empty void, but nodes in a vast network of meaning, a network that includes us, that has always included us, that was built, in part, for us. We were not meant to be alone on this planet. We were not meant to forget. And somewhere, beneath miles of ancient ice, at the bottom of a world that we have declared empty and irrelevant, something waits. It has been waiting for a very long time. It knows the geometry. It knows the frequencies. It knows the arrangement of every stone in every temple on every continent, because it was there when they were placed. And the map that fell from the sky in 1947 was not a discovery. It was a reminder that the universe is not a cold and empty accident, but a structure, a design, a cathedral of matter and energy and intention so vast that we can perceive only its smallest details, the way an ant perceives only the grain of sand beneath its feet and not the mountain that the grain was broken from. We stand at the foot of that mountain now. We have always been standing here. The only thing that has changed is that we are, at last, slowly, painfully, against every effort of those who would keep us in darkness, beginning to look up.